Dizzy, my head is spinning. Back to 1987 on ChinnyVision, a game that needs no introduction, but a game that people assume was a massive hit from day one. And Dizzy is actually the very definition of what you'd call a slow burner. So this would have been originally coded on the Amstrad CPC, but we're going to start off with the Spectrum because this is the version that most people will be familiar with, of course written by the Oliver twins. And really regarded as nothing particularly special when they were programming it. It was just another game, although one that they were personally quite keen on. Codemasters weren't. In fact, the reason the game says by the Oliver twins on the front cover is because Codemasters didn't really have much faith in the game, but the Oliver twins' previous games have been really successful, so they thought, hey, perhaps we can market this off the back of the success of the previous games. So again, you know the deal, it's Dizzy. You walk along, you collect the objects, and you use them to activate various things. You've got to defeat the wizard Zax by pulling together a spell potion and then throwing it at him in a kind of glass bottle thing. Over to the Amstrad CPC, just so we can see how this version starts off. Of course, the Oliver twins programmed all their games on Amstrad CPC 6128, or certainly all their early games, and then it was ported across to the Spectrum using a cable produced, a bit of software, as well as a cable produced by a guy called Ivan Link. And of course, being the CPC of a proper AY tune, not a beeper tune, and it's going to be ostensibly the same as the Spectrum version. Of course, the first game the Oliver twins did for Codemasters was Super Robin Hood, which was a beautiful Mode Naught 16 colour game on the CPC. It looked absolutely beautiful. But if you do that on the CPC, then you've got to convert all those graphics across to the Spectrum, and that's difficult because Spectrum only has limited colours and it's a different screen resolution. So much easier if you just limit the CPC to Spectrum style graphics, then you can port it across to the Spectrum much more quickly. But of course, that means the CPC version suffers from specky graphics. And we do get in-game music and far better definition on Dizzy. Dizzy is of course an egg, famously because the Oliver twins had this bit of software called Panda Sprites they'd written, and the easiest thing to animate was an egg. Although they say it's an egg, I look at the head and it does actually remind me of something. It's often said that people buy dogs that look like their owners, like themselves. Well, yeah, I mean, perhaps Dizzy is a little bit close to home? I don't know. But looking good on the CPC, it's a little bit slower than the Spectrum version and does suffer from slowdown the more moving sprites there are on the screen. Over to the C64. Very attractive loading screen here with Dizzy looking over Zax's castle. And yes, the C64 is going to suffer from specky graphics as well. But you do get a nice tune as well here. I've heard this tune somewhere else before. Can't think where. It's in another game, isn't it? I can't remember. Codemasters did reuse tunes. Ninja Massacre uses the music from BMX Simulator to much better effect than BMX Simulator ever does on its title screen. Ninja Massacre, it's a really good kind of ninja beat-em-up tune. And yeah, we're looking at very simple graphics here on the C64. Beware, the spiders on the C64 version move much faster, and executing moves around them requires much more skill. The birds and bats, when they're on the screen on the C64 version, seem to pause for a second or two before they start moving. But other than that, it's a pretty straight port. And we're back across to the Spectrum, and we jumped across there, and you would have hardly noticed that, I guess. By the way, if you see any corruption on my Spectrum version, it's the image I'm using. I don't know what it is. It seems to corrupt the side kind of walls of the play area and the score table as well. Didn't select a cheat, but appears I have one. So I've got that key, and we've moved on a bit, and I've walked down the other end of the map and opened up the graveyard. And there is a lot of walking around in this game, which I'm trying to skip. Also, there's a little bit of cheating going on. I say cheating, I want to show as much of the game as I can possibly can. I've not played this game for 20 years. The reason for that is I'm completely and utterly bored of it. I played it to death when I got this on the Cartoon Classics, I think it was, compilation, and also the Amstrad Action cover tape on the first regular edition of Amstrad Action that had a cover tape. And of course the CPC version again. And the CPC version does have this nice definition on the graphics, although it doesn't cope too well when you're standing in front of things. And we dig a hole there and we drop down into the underground area. And that trail we saw on the previous screen, you can use that to move one of the mushrooms to make it easy to jump out of the area. Extra life over to the right hand side there. And you jump on the mushrooms and you bounce. And you hit the stalactites and you die. Or if they're one of the ones that move, it's very difficult to tell which ones are active and which ones aren't. And if you enjoy fine retro games running on original hardware as featured here on ChinnyVision, then check out the ChinnyVision 2018 calendar. A full A3 size calendar, professionally printed, featuring nothing but screenshots from original hardware. Order today from ChinnyVision.com. Stock is limited. Back to the C64 and we're down the mine. I've just dropped the Ghost Hunter's laser, reference to the game Ghost Hunters, down on the Ghost, and that activates the lift, and I can now go up and down this section. We are going to jump around all over the place with this because Dizzy's a big game, and frankly, having not played it for so long, I just can't remember which way to tackle things. So this is usually a fairly easy screen on the Spectrum and Amstrad CPC. On C64 it's a little bit hard. It's one of those tiny little differences in the gameplay. We'll see here on the Amstrad version, this is really easy because these move at a certain speed, go through a certain sequence, and you can jump over without dying. It's not difficult at all. But as I say, on the C64 version, it's just a little bit harder. And there are just those few slight differences on the C64 compared to the Amstrad and the Spectrum. And over to the Spectrum now. And this game only came out on the Spectrum, Amstrad CPC and Commodore 64. No 16-bit ports. Treasure Island Dizzy was the first Dizzy game converted to the 16-bits. But there are unofficial versions. There's certainly unofficial versions of the Dizzy games, possibly Dizzy 1, certainly later Dizzy games on the Commodore Plus 4. And I think possibly there may be a version of this floating around for the MSX. It certainly wouldn't be much work to port it. It's a game that's very rough around the edges. You can see the graphical glitches. The Oliver twins had an idea for this, and they knocked it together fairly quickly. The danger area down there, you can walk over it, but if you drop down off that lift onto the ground, not the sign, you will die. Watch out for any of those danger or dang signs in the game, because that means you've got to keep an eye out. Spiders can be killed with an insecticide can that's hanging around further down the right hand side of the map, and you can reuse that as well. There's also, I've got the purse of gold at the moment. You need the purse of gold. You need to drop that into the bucket outside the hermit's house, I think, from memory. And then you'll get one of the ingredients to kill, for the spell, to kill the wizard Zax. And that cauldron there, that's the first thing I did on the game, was to light the cauldron using the flame, because that's where you've got to put all your ingredients. And this screen is difficult. Well, I'll show this later. You must jump the right point. If you don't, you drop down into the danger area. You can never get out. And if you do die by jumping into the middle, you'll spawn again, and you still can't cross that section. Oh, and you've got to watch that on that screen there. You've got to jump from further back. So on the C64, moving to the left-hand side of the mine area, got the plastic Mac, so I can go under there and absorb all the raindrops. Don't need it again, so just dropped it there, because you need it on other parts of the map. And again, these spiders do move faster on the C64. Magazine reviews at the time weren't terribly good for the game. Some magazines liked it. I remember competing with the Amstrad, we were a bit meh. about it, 70 something percent, I think, saying they thought it wasn't very polished, as I recall, and didn't particularly like it. And it didn't sell particularly well to begin with either, but it was a steady seller. Most games started off selling well and dropped off. Dizzy didn't sell terribly well, but never really dropped off. And the Codemasters starting to get letters saying, hey, we completed Dizzy. Can we have another Dizzy game? And that's where Treasure Island Dizzy came in. So same area on the Amstrad CPC. Okay, and use one less raindrop on the Spectrum and Amstrad than the Commodore 64. You can get into the area down there we just passed. I think you need the crowbar. Oh, it's a long time since I played this game. So jump up there. There's a boat down there. I think you need the rusty bolt cutters to release it. We just passed there. And that's the insecticide. Is that the insecticide or is that the deep freeze or the carbon dioxide spray that freezes the river? Over the Spectrum, same sequence again, just a little bit faster. Everything's in the same place. There's no weird issues between the versions. Any issues are very, very minor. As I say, that little bridge you had to jump over to get the bag of gold. That's the crowbar down there that opens up that trapdoor that we saw earlier. The game is set in Kathmandu, difference from the later games. And look, there's a gem up here that you've got to give to a yellow idol. Now, where do we see yellow idol? Of course, the graveyard, and I died there. And we're going to go a gleaming emerald, and we've got to take this. We've got to take this gleaming emerald all the way down the other end of the map, and you can only hold one item at a time. If you came to the Dizzy series later, as many people did, when you could hold more than one item, this is incredibly frustrating. So on the Amstrad version, we've got the gleaming emerald. We're going to walk down here and find the not yellow idol. But it's got a big eye, so I'm guessing this is what it is. And yep, it opens up and you can drop down. And you drop down into a tunnel that goes nowhere because you can't squeeze through. And you get little scrolling messages on the screen giving you hints. Interestingly, if you manage to touch one of those messages with Dizzy, they're actual objects. They're hard. There's collision detection. Sometimes when you're bouncing on a mushroom, you can actually touch them. That broken heart there, I think you take that to the graveyard and you drop it in front of the statue. This is Zax's castle, by the way, on the Spectrum. And there's Zax. Got infinite lives, so we can stand here. And there you go, that's the wizard Zax. You've got to get in there somehow and throw a vial of the concoction you've got to mix up at him. So good luck with that. There's the statue there. If I drop that, broken heart, there we go. And we drop into another secret area. Incidentally, cheat on the Amstrad version. If you hold down the words, is it Trowbridge, where the Oliver twins came from? Hold down Trowbridge all in one, and you get, I think, infinite lives. Funny things you remember. I didn't have to use that because the game was hacked anyway. And this is what happens on this screen here if you walk across the middle, which everyone does when they first play Dizzy. You drop down. You spawn back, you now cannot get past this screen and you cannot complete the game. And that item at the top is the vial of things you need to mix your mixture up in. Scary bones down there. So Dizzy 1 was a slow burner and I can see why. Dizzy later became an absolutely massive game. Treasure Island Dizzy, Dizzy 2, selling I think 250,000 copies on the Spectrum alone. Massive, massive sales. If you are used to the later Dizzy games, you're going to find this very frustrating. There was a lot of walking around from one extreme end of the map to the other, and you can only pick up one item at the time, which can be a little bit dull, especially if you're used to playing more tightly produced games. Especially, I'm thinking Dizzy Prince of the Yoke Folk, which is for me the pinnacle of the Dizzy series. That said, if you're not like me and completely bored of this game because I just played it to death back in the early 90s, it is good fun. The Amstrad version looks very polished but suffers a massive slowdown, especially on the screen where you've got to jump across the logs to get to the other side. Really, really massive slowdown there. Spectrum version, much faster, although less polished than the Amstrad CPC version. C64 version, I find the C64 version a little bit challenging because it's just got these tiny little differences. It's still very much good fun. But overall, I'd put all the versions pretty much on par. There's slight tweaks and differences between the versions. Amstrad version has a little bit of slowdown. C64 version, just slight variations in gameplay. Whichever format you've got, you can enjoy an authentic Dizzy experience. The only thing is, perhaps if you're looking to start off in the Dizzy series, I'd much rather recommend Dizzy Prince of the Yolkfolk, especially on the Amiga.